Pay close attention. The news you're about to see is fulfilling Bible prophecy.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news that relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Well, in the news, we're going to talk about the South China Sea becoming a very disputed territory. Always was, but now seems like it's taking another notch up. China getting involved, the U.S., even Taiwan.
Right.
So that there is becoming some of the analysts are really watching that, saying, hey, this could be a huge hotspot right here in the months to come. Also, we'll have the latest on COVID and some of the countries that are affected extremely bad. India, Brazil, two of the worst hit right now with staggering numbers. We'll have those details, as well as the latest military upgrades that Russia has been working on these past few years. What they said a few years ago was thinking a possibility, now it looks like is a reality.
Right.
So those stories and many more. But first, in the past reports, we have told you a lot about how COVID is affecting America. But tonight, we're going to focus on the rest of the world's battle with the pandemic that does not end. Now, Germany has lost almost 80,000 people to the virus. Europe as a whole is still in the middle of their third surge, and in Canada, things don't look any better. Their medical system is under so much stress that they opened a children's hospital in Toronto for adult patients.
Wow. However, there are two places that no one wants to be right now, and that is Brazil and India. As you've mentioned before, in Brazil, the majority of patients in the ICU are under 40. That is a first time ever event there. And while some think variants of COVID are to blame, no one is arguing that more people have been dying from the virus in Brazil than anywhere else on the planet. That's until now.
India is quickly taking the lead in this pandemic for the number of coronavirus cases at 200,000 cases a day. For 9 straight days, and for 2 days now, it has reported the most new daily cases in the world. Now, many believe the surge is due largely to the country still holding its annual Kumbh Mela festival, where millions of devoted Hindus bathe in the Ganges River, which they believe ritually cleanses them of their sins. But as we've seen, the Ganges River is highly polluted. Sewer running straight in there,
Right.
And so a lot of death already in that river, and now becoming a super spreader here.
Yeah.
The festival is now being called a mega spreader event, which has caused healthcare officials to brace for what they call a COVID tsunami.
That's right. In the capital city of Delhi, the largest hospitals are overwhelmed by the number of sick patients being administered, and still more are seeking to be admitted. In the ER, the dead are constantly being carried out while new patients equally as sick and dying are brought in. The greatest need for most is oxygen, as many have extremely difficulties in breathing. Some have even taken to begging on social media to find help.
Well, many people are shocked at the realization that their country's healthcare system is failing. Now, due to the crowded situation inside the hospitals, people are crowding around outside, still seeking medical attention. But there is no help for them, and even though family members try to get oxygen and medicine for them, many are dying while waiting to be taken care of. To many, the hospital seems a useless place, and that, as one person commented, these hospitals, that's what she said, completely useless. At this point where people go, the hospitals are now a place where people go to die instead of receiving the healing that they're hoping for.
Yeah. Well, there is so much grief and hopelessness in the city. One resident told Sky News, "I have a message for the government. Please do something and please release some oxygen supplies. People need it here. People need beds here. People need injections. People need medicines. Well, there are over 2,000 deaths per day now, but the government fears there are still more unreported or unlogged deaths, which would make the situation even more disastrous.
Well, the most current information we have now is that India just hit a record high of 330,000 cases in the last 24 hours. And as we reported before, makeshift crematories have been set up in parking lots, some operating 24/7, where traumatized workers have seen the full spectrum from preschoolers to newlywed couples to parents and grandparents. The virus is no respecter of age or status.
Interesting. We mentioned that before about the burning in the crematoriums, and not only that, there's been reports of even dead bodies being dumped in that Ganges River,
Right.
which, as we mentioned before, a lot of people go there to bathe. A lot of people get that for their drinking and their bathing water as well. So, no wonder that the variants in that area are seeming to spread and become a lot more rampant. Well, Dr. Saswati Sinha works at the hospital in Kolkata. She told Sky News that her staff has been traumatized by having to turn patients away because they just cannot help them. Dr. Sinha explained, each time you turn away or tell a patient's next of kin that we cannot do anything for them or don't have a bed for them, that makes you go through a lot of emotional turmoil as well. Well, the Prime Minister of India referred to the surges as a COVID storm. He is still allowing mass political rallies and elections to continue as normal in spite of all of this.
Yeah. Well, another country that is facing turmoil because of the pandemic is Japan. Now, the Asian island just announced a new state of emergency and lockdown measures. Now, this comes just 3 months before the Summer Olympics are scheduled to start in Tokyo. Now, while the country has had very few cases and fatalities compared to other countries, they are trying to continue things now so they don't get out of hand. Now, the main reason for this is because the country's officials have promised to go on with the Olympic Games as planned. So they're hoping to take a few lockdown measures and so forth, shut things down so that they can still have the Olympic Games in 3 months.
Interesting. Well, a new possible side effect from Pfizer's COVID-19 shot is the question that many are asking is, and in Israel, in fact, they are studying 6 cases of people who broke out with the herpes virus after receiving the vaccine. We'll take a look at this brief video for more information on that.
Well, now we're seeing this herpes virus here, actually, some people suffering that as a side effect from the vaccines. We've seen the dementia, we've seen the neurological problems, also the blood clots, and now you have this. So it's just, more and more we're seeing these groups of people coming out with these same side effects from taking these vaccines. Well, on a similar note, even doctors are getting sick from taking the vaccines. Dr. Judith Lightfoot from Jefferson Health in New Jersey was one of them. On her second dose, Lightfoot reported having chills and shakes, and her arm became red and swollen where she received her shot. Now, she believed it was her body's antibody response to the messenger RNA part of the vaccine. Not only did she feel very sick, she was also extremely fatigued for about 36 hours.
But it is not the same for everyone. Dr. Lisa Tank, Chief Medical Officer at Hackensack Meridian Health, said she had no headaches, no fever, no chills, just fatigue. Well, the second dose wasn't a big deal for her, but she says different people will have a range of reactions to the second shot of both Pfizer's and Moderna's mRNA vaccines.
Well, clinical trial results for Moderna's vaccine revealed more frequent reactions to the second dose than the first one, which included almost 63% having headaches and muscle aches, and 45% joint pain, chills, and 15 experienced a fever. And what's even more interesting was that it was more frequent in adults under the age of 65 and less frequent in those over that same age, which usually it's the opposite. The older you get, it seems like the more you're affected. This completely opposite. The younger the age or under the 65 experience it greater than those over 65.
Which is kind of a flip from what we saw at the beginning of this pandemic, where it seemed that more older people were suffering as a result, and even the government said that it doesn't seem to be something affecting young people. Well, now we're seeing that, as mentioned before, COVID is not a respecter of persons. Well, we're going to turn it over to our field correspondent, Larry McGee, who has more information for us in regards to the current status of COVID shots, as well as what is taking place with China warning the U.S. in regards to Taiwan. We know there's a lot of activity taking place in that South China Sea, and some tensions that are on the continual rise between China and the Philippines. Larry, what do you have for us?
Despite many colossal letdowns, high-level and media fanfare for vaccines has continued, but among ordinary citizens, disappointing results and health hazards related to vaccines are beginning to take their toll. Less people are excited about and pursuing inoculation, and this has the nation's top health officials in a state of concern. The popular position is that vaccinations are the ticket out of the pandemic, and so for citizens to begin shrinking back now sends off alarm bells at the possibility of deepening the crisis. At present, states are reporting a decrease in reported infections accompanied by increases in hospitalizations and COVID-related deaths. As a means of trying to regalvanize public interest and excitement concerning the shot, the current administration is offering various incentives to employers and encouraging paid leave to receive inoculation. The U.S. received a grave warning from Beijing this week not to play with fire concerning Taiwan. But despite that, the U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken has doubled down on the U.S.'s commitment to defend the island. The differences over the matter has led to more military posturing by both sides. Chinese President Xi Jinping has publicly refused to cede the strategic island to American control, while America maintains that the provincial setup point is an independent and sovereign entity. Daily, Chinese aircraft and naval vessels are reported to be engaged in maneuvers to demonstrate its ability to quickly cut off Taiwan from any outside assistance. For Beijing, control over the island is said to be a red line, and one that many fear will escalate into even greater tensions. There are tensions elsewhere in the Pacific for China as well, as it strives to establish dominance over the resources of the South China Sea. That ambition brings it into conflict with several other nations who all believe themselves to have a legitimate claim in the matter, including the Philippines, where the citizens are accusing their once outspoken president of becoming soft and allowing Beijing to have its way. To that, President Duarte is said to have responded that he is not so much interested in fighting over a few fish. But when it gets to the point of drilling for oil, that is when he says he will send his great ships. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan Jeff, back to you.
Well, from Larry's stories there, it seems like no matter what country we look at, there's problems that each country is dealing with, whether it's preparing for war with another country or just displeased with another country's actions. Tit for tat going on all over the world.
Yeah, and you've got that area of the South China Sea where there are many different little islands there, little countries that, they consider themselves, sovereign nations. Well, right. China is saying, no, these are our territories. We have rights in these areas. This is our water. you kind of owe a little bit of allegiance to us or you belong to us. So you see a lot of push and pull, like you said before, between them as well as the United States getting involved and being allies with some of those countries as well.
And with China having such a strong military compared to these, like you said,
the
smaller
smaller
nations,
ones.
it's really pretty lopsided. You know, there's not much these smaller ones can do unless they try to get the U.S. backing or the backing of their allies.
That's right.
Well, Israel claims a surface-to-air missile was launched from Syria, causing alarms to sound at the Israeli Dimona nuclear site. Now, eyewitnesses said that explosions occurred, shaking houses in the south of Israel, but explosions were heard as far as Jerusalem. Now, Israel's IDF issued a statement saying a surface-to-air missile was fired from Syria to Israel's southern Negev. Now, in response, we struck the battery from which the missile was launched and additional surface-to-air batteries in Syria. Now, this strike from Syria was thought to be in retaliation for an air attack from Israel in the early hours of the morning.
Well, there was some concern that the attack targeted the Dimona nuclear facility, and as you probably know, Israel's stance has always been nuclear ambiguity. They neither acknowledge or deny its nuclear status. Well, one thing Israel has acknowledged is its role in carrying out these recent attacks against Syria in an attempt to stop the growing Iranian presence in its Syrian neighbor.
Well, Russia has warned the U.S. not to cross the red line that it says it will determine where it is. Now, this statement given while Russia is continuing its military buildup along its border with Ukraine. Satellite images show Russian fighter jets and other military equipment lined up on tarmacs in southern Russia and Crimea. Now, U.S. military leaders are concerned that the Russian moves might lead to Russia considering the use of nuclear weapons as the least bad option. Admiral Charles Richard of the U.S. Strategic Command said that this is the first time in history that the U.S. has to consider defending itself against two enemies at the same time. Those two enemies, Russia and China.
And it's interesting how that is actually being considered the least bad options. You know, 50 years ago, that was the worst option, but it seems like some people's minds have shifted into thinking that the use of nuclear weapons is not going to be as bad as people previously have said it will be, and that creates a danger in itself.
Right, almost like drop the bomb on them, get it over with quick.
Right, yeah, sad. Well, one of the concerns is that the admiral has is that the weapons that the U.S. has at its disposal is from the 70s, and that must go up. These weapons, of course, must go up against the 2030 level threat, so very advanced currently. Some want to scrap the nuclear triad, which is some 400 nuclear ground-based missiles in silos across 3 states, and the head of Strategic Command says he needs to replace, not upgrade, those 50-year-old Minuteman missiles. Well, Senator Warren from Massachusetts said that we're spending $44.5 billion a year on nuclear weapons, and I know that Stratcom likes spending that money, but she said, I don't.
Well, the U.S. stopped keeping B-51 bombers on 24-hour alert back in 1991, but the admiral worries that if the U.S. scraps its ground-based missiles, it would have to rely on submarine-based nukes, and he said under those circumstances he would request to re-enlist the bombers to have 2 out of the 3 if they were going to redo the missile silos.
Yeah, and that was costing the U.S. a lot of money even at that time, because, and it would be exponentially more now, because they kept those bombers running 24 hours a day, all that fuel being used and men and women being on standby ready to go at a moment's notice. Well, Russia is seizing the opportunity as the Arctic ice is melting faster than ever as its new testing grounds for its latest military weaponry. We'll take a look at this video as it explains more of what the plans of Russia are.
It is a new frontier expanding for all the wrong reasons, with pushy neighbors rushing in. Russia is seeing the Arctic ice melt fast and filling the gap with a military buildup, some of it on North America's doorstep, not seen since the Cold War. Key is a new generation of superweapons like the Poseidon, a 200-kilometer-an-hour nuclear-propelled stealth torpedo. It's designed, say Russian officials, to sneak past Western coastal defenses and detonate a 2-megaton warhead, causing a radioactive tsunami to hit North America's east coast with contaminated water. Experts say the weapon is very real. It'll be tested in the summer near Norway, whose intelligence head said it's not only the ecological damage that could be bad.
It is in a testing phase. It's a strategic system and it's aimed at targets and has then an influence far beyond the region in which they test it currently.
Some said Russian President Vladimir Putin was fantasizing when he revealed this and other new weapons like the hypersonic Skiron missile in 2018. But continuing development and tests make them very real.
Well, it kind of shows you how Russia has been focused on improving their military and their weapons advancements, while the U.S. spending their time kind of meddling in other countries' business, still having these 50-year-old missile silos that they're hoping to rely on, as opposed to the latest and greatest, if you would, Poseidon missile that we just saw there. So you see Russia highly advanced here, or taking quite a few steps to increase their military.
And along with that, them being able to open up those shipping lanes, those shipping routes between Russia and Europe, which we know that Nord Stream 2 pipeline has been a big deal between Russia and Germany, not between them, but seen as a big deal for the United States because they're losing money in that regards. Well, if Russia has that route open, well, that's going to cut the United States out for even more things, which is going to put a little bit more of a flame underneath the U.S.'s economy. Well, that Poseidon missile can actually trigger a nuclear tsunami. That's right, it can travel through the sea undetected, and once it explodes, it can set off a chain reaction of radioactive waves, triggering a tsunami that could sweep over an inhabited city, leaving it unlivable for several decades. The Poseidon 2M39 torpedo is planning to be tested by Russia this year. Now, so far, 3 submarines that are slated to carry the torpedo are undergoing tests in the Arctic, where Russia is said to be building a military presence as Arctic ice is melting, allowing for a shipping route between Russia and Europe.
Well, the report says that Putin wants to deploy the Poseidon in the Arctic in the summer of 2022. Now, advanced weapons are one way for countries to exert power, and it seems that Russia isn't short of ideas.
That's right. Well, lastly, when people think about nuclear explosions, they mostly think about the blast, the heat, and the resulting destruction, but many don't take into consideration something called EMP. That's right, an EMP, or electromagnetic pulse, according to Peter Pry, a defense analyst from Live Science, said you can use a single weapon to collapse the entire North American power grid. Once the power grid goes down, everything would collapse. Everything depends on the electricity, from communications, telecommunications, transportation, and even water.
Well, Pry served on the Congressional EMP Commission, whose mission was to assess the threat of EMP attacks, and that commission was disbanded in 2017.
Well, if the power grid does go down, they're speculating here with the use of electromagnetic weaponry, which actually is a result of a nuclear explosion, and Russia is saying that is the least bad option that could be used. Right. So it's definitely on the table. Well, what will everyone do? Is the government prepared, is the question? Are global citizens prepared? It'll be a kind of back to basics way of life after that. And then we've got to take into consideration as well what we have here with the continual buildup of the coronavirus and how that's putting a heavy, heavy burden on people, infrastructures, and everything in general. It's just going to create a recipe for just complete disaster globally for all citizens, one which, no country is going to come out on top after it's all said and done.
Right, and as you mentioned, Katan, about the electricity going down, remember it was just a few weeks ago where the South here, Texas specifically, experienced the worst winter storm in over 100 years, where many people experienced what it was like to live without electricity. And people lost their lives because they were completely caught off guard. This area isn't used to seeing those type of temperatures for that long, or that, that prolonged time. And without electricity, as you mentioned, there was no water. Of course, most of the pipes were frozen. So, it was a rough situation. And what we're talking about here is going to be 10 times worse, if not 100 times worse, if it would be all across the United States, as they're saying.
And it's kind of hard for a lot of people to think, but just a mere 50 to 100 years ago, that's the way everybody lived. I mean, people didn't have running water. They didn't have electricity. They didn't have cell phones. They didn't have the things that we become so dependent upon right now. And they still went through some pretty extreme conditions at that time, from heat to cold to drought to floods and so forth. And they seem to make it just fine. So I think it's going to be kind of an eye-opener for society as a whole. Once these power grids do go down, they're going to need to look to some people for help and guidance on what to do, because they've just not been trained on how to survive during those hard times.
Right, and it's as if when that occurs, because it's not a matter of if, but when it takes place, it looks like we will all be going back to that 1930s time period, where, just as you mentioned, they didn't have all those so-called luxuries that made mankind so dependent upon things like electricity and running water and things of that sort. So, but as you mentioned, they are going to need guidance, and that's where we focus our attention on our next speaker, Yisrael Hawkins, who's going to be bringing us the information we need to survive those terrible times.
That's right.
So if you'd like to learn more about these stories and others, contact the House of Yahweh. When you do, don't forget to request your free copy of the monthly newsletter and Prophetic Word magazine. Here's how. Well, to contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites by going to yahweh.com, yisraelhawkins.com, or yahwehsbranch.com. If you would like to visit our website, you can visit that by going to ypnnews.com. If you would like to email the House of Yahweh, you can do so by emailing info@yahweh.com. For any international calls, you can call the number that's up on your screen right now. And once again, as you see there, two absolutely free, the best Bible study tools on the market, the Yisrael Says program and the Ask Yisrael program. You can go there by respectively going to yisraelsays.com or askyisrael.com. Plug in your keyword search or phrase, guaranteed to pull up pages and pages of information for you to occupy your time. If you are in one of these countries that has a lockdown, this would be a great way to spend your time researching these Bible topics.
Well, don't go anywhere. Get your scriptures, some paper, and something to write with, and be prepared for a tremendous amount of beneficial information, because up next is Yisrael Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Hammerman.
Thank you for joining us.